Don't even get me started on the little nerd back on Earth 1999-99.
Spider-Man Homecoming had a lot going for it. Captain America Civil War had a solid setup for Peter Parker. We finally got to skip the origin so we can jump straight into a fresh new story. And we finally get to see Spider-Man as a major protagonist in the MCU. So obviously, this movie had lots of expectations, especially after the last movie's poor reception. So the question is, did it live up to the hype? While it's not as monumentally broken as The Amazing Spider-Man 2 or the others in the trilogy, it still has a lot of problems as a story, which I'll get into in a moment. And I know some people don't care as much about the plot details and might just want to skip to the character discussions, which is fine, which you can do by looking at the timestamps in the description. The plot is kicked off by Adrian and his crew salvaging the leftover alien tech from the first Avengers battle. Their city contract gets breached and they're forced off the job, which financially screws over Adrian and his entire crew. This causes them to make use of the alien tech as opposed to returning it, then using it to make weapons and make money. I think the initial problem lies in why they shouldn't have gotten far to begin with. We know that S.H.I.E.L.D., Tony Stark, and Damage Control would have interest in salvaging the alien technology to avoid it falling into the wrong hands. Tony would especially feel responsible for this considering it was his fight, and he strongly believes in personal accountability, while S.H.I.E.L.D. monitors potential threats and would have awareness of the potential that the alien tech has for weapons of mass destruction.
People is really that naive? S.H.I.E.L.D. monitors potential threats.
Captain America's on threat one.
We all are.
That means that all the parties I've mentioned would want to keep tabs on any salvaging operations on record that have contracts within the city, because there's a chance that they've already retrieved exotic material and can disobey Damage Control's orders to turn it over. S.H.I.E.L.D. regularly operates to account for these potential outcomes. They would also have interest in finding any traces of alien tech in general before other people can pick up on them at random areas in the city. And how might S.H.I.E.L.D., Tony Stark, and Damage Control manage to keep track of the alien tech as well as the salvaging operations? Well, for starters, let's take a look at this scene later in the film.
It's saying there was an energy pulse right here.
There's no sign of the weapon, and even if it was here, now it's gone.
What this line is referring to is when Peter banged the Chitauri energy core and caused an unwanted reaction. This energy pulse was picked up on by the Vulture's crew. So if the Vulture's crew is capable of tracing their weapons when they give off energy pulses from miles away, don't you think S.H.I.E.L.D. and Tony Stark would be able to do the same thing with their billion-dollar tech at their disposal? S.H.I.E.L.D. has plenty of resources used for tracing energy signatures, which Tony and Bruce have routinely utilized in the Avengers. Tony would have access to the alien tech, which Karen even remarks on when Peter comes across another one of these energy cores.
That glowy thing is an explosive Chitauri energy core.
So with all the exotic material that Tony Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. collect and have strong intel on, don't you think they'd want to study this stuff so they have ways of tracing it the same way Vulture's crew did? With their intellect and resources, this shouldn't be a problem for them, especially if Vulture's crew is capable of this with significantly less resources. So from 2012 to 2016, Tony Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. somehow didn't trace the alien tech back to Vulture's hideout, despite the fact that his crew would routinely make use of the alien tech to make their weapons. Tony would have tracked down Vulture's crew in a heartbeat alongside anyone who bought and used their weapons, and the plot is now over. I'd also say that Bruce Banner would help out if Tony couldn't, or any of the highly intelligent scientists working for S.H.I.E.L.D. Not only that, but S.H.I.E.L.D. has super advanced surveillance technology, so advanced that it allowed them to spot Loki in Germany by just having access to what his face looks like.
We're sweeping every wirelessly accessible camera on the planet. Cell phones, laptops. If it's connected to a satellite, it's eyes and ears for us.
Got a hit. Cross-match, 79%. Stuttgart, Germany.
All security cameras in the city go through this monitor right here. Scan all open sources, phones, computers, PDAs. Someone tweets about this guy. I want to know about it.
If S.H.I.E.L.D. makes use of their surveillance technology, especially if they've traced where these alien materials are, it's over for Vulture. S.H.I.E.L.D. would especially be on top of this when you consider how Fury remarks on how the world is changing in recent years.
Last year, Earth had a visitor from another planet who had a grudge match that leveled a small town. We are hopelessly, hilariously outgunned. The world's filling up with people that can't be matched. They can't be controlled.
And it's not just S.H.I.E.L.D. that has strong surveillance technology. Over the years, Tony has been developing his own system, which he utilized to break into one of the Hydra bases.
Jarvis, what's the view from upstairs?
The central building is protected by some kind of energy shield.
Another gaping hole in the story has to do in the ways in which Adrian's crew is financially screwed over. They had a contract with the city to salvage these materials, and Stark Industries and Damage Control just breached it without any notice, meaning Adrian has wasted tons of money on the operation that they weren't even allowed to do anyway.
I have a city contract to salvage all this.
Please turn over any and all exotic materials that you've collected, or you will be prosecuted.
I bought trucks for this job. I brought in a whole new crew. These guys have a family. I have a family. I'm all in on this. I could lose my house.
I'm sorry, sir. There's nothing I can do.
This is a big problem for a couple reasons. Legally speaking, you can't do this to someone. You can't breach their contract without notice and give them no compensation whatsoever. Adrian has a strong case on his hands right now and could win a suit against Damage Control and Stark Industries and be paid heavily as a result. But let's cut off the legal aspect for a moment, because even if it did get to that point, Tony would put a stop to it by simply compensating for the money they would have lost. This is Tony Stark. He wouldn't allow innocent people to possibly lose their homes and be unable to take care of their families because of a contract breach that he was responsible for. That's not Tony Stark. That's Norman Osborn.
You cowboy up and do what you have to do.
So even if we ignore the fact that legally speaking, it makes no sense for Damage Control to tell Toombs that there's nothing they can do, it's simply within Tony's character to help these workers that will get financially screwed over. Even if this wasn't a law in the MCU, Tony Stark himself would still implement a system to pay these workers out of basic principle. So not only does it not make sense how Vulture's crew is screwed over, but it's massively out of character for Tony Stark to allow them to suffer financially for no good reason. The entire plot is built around Tony Stark being severely out of character while ignoring the resources he and S.H.I.E.L.D. would have to stop the Vulture before he can succeed anywhere. Later on, Spider-Man takes on a group of criminals who bought these weapons from Vulture's crew. This seems to be the beginning of any superheroes or law enforcement agencies looking into the alien tech weapons on the street. This is the first time our main characters seem to be hearing about it, and we do have this line from Vulture.
8 years, not a word from the feds, nothing from those Halloween costume-wearing bozos up there in Stark Tower. And then all of a sudden, this little bastard in red tights shows up.
There hasn't been any noise regarding the alien tech weapons on Vulture's end all this time, despite the fact he's been selling these weapons for years. Was this simply the first time it was ever heard of in the public eye? Because if so, this is a problem for a multitude of reasons. First of all, for 4 years, Vulture's crew would have been making and selling these alien weapons to criminals in New York. They've been making enough money to live off this for 4 years after they faced a severe loss of money that could make them lose their homes, which speaks to the frequency and profitability of their sales. Second of all, I brought up earlier that Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. should already be looking for the alien material in the first place and outlined why they'd be able to. So any crimes that have been committed with these weapons should have already caught the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D., the FBI, and the Avengers. And even if they didn't find anything from the crimes themselves, that would at least put them in the know on the fact that there are weapons out there being used, and constantly scanning the energy pulses would lead to consistent results inside Vulture's base, since they often test these weapons in there. The fact there have been crimes committed with the alien tech weapons shouldn't be new information for the FBI. But on top of this, the initial bank robbery is what gets Tony Stark to listen to Peter and call the FBI.
I did listen, kid. Who do you think called the FBI, huh?
The FBI becomes aware of this soon after Peter does, and they already have their leads on the Vulture's crew within a week. So if the FBI was made aware years earlier as they should have, then the Vulture's crew should have been caught long before Spider-Man even existed, especially with Iron Man's help. The plot is further damaged by the fact that Peter learns of how the Vulture's crew obtains their materials moving forward. They've been consistently stealing from Damage Control for years, and their existence still isn't even known. These trucks have very little security measures despite Tony Stark signing on to these terms. In the MCU, where the technology is highly advanced and superhumans exist, alongside high levels of corruption within high positions of power, there should be a lot more security measures for alien technology, which gave the Avengers a hard time. The Vulture can just enter the truck without any armed guards or security cameras witnessing this. He's able to open these crates so casually, as if they weren't under lock and key. Even if they were, and he just broke the locks with brute force, this sets off no alarms whatsoever. Tony Stark signed off on this. If the Vulture has done this for years, then Damage Control would be aware of it since the first robbery. On the second robbery, they definitely increased their security, maybe even have Tony Stark in a suit watching over some of these drives. That's not even touching upon how much security would increase upon the discovery of how deeply corrupted the US government was because of Hydra. Whether it be Iron Man or armed guards, Vulture shouldn't be able to reach these trucks without resistance, and his existence should have been known years ago. He should have been caught years ago. Already, that's several major reasons as to why the entire plot should have ended before we even reached the present day. And considering the technology that the Vulture's crew has access to, I find them implausibly incompetent given the resources they have. They imply that because they're running out of alien technology, they have nothing left.
I can finish the next order, but without any new materials from that truck.
We still have enough to do the cargo deal though, right?
Yeah, but then that's it.
No, that's not. If the Vulture's crew wanted to increase their revenue, why not make a profit off selling one of the most useful resources in a robbery, like the flight suit? And I don't just mean for the situation, I mean the entire time they've been operating. I'm not undermining the usefulness of the weapons, but as far as escape plans go, the Vulture wings open incredible opportunities. Considering they've been repeatedly producing the alien tech weapons, they would also be capable of doing the same with the flight suit. Flying away from a crime scene is incredibly useful. These things can keep up with speeding planes. They can take you thousands of feet in the air in a short amount of time. Considering we don't ever see technology of this caliber outside of hidden military tech only used by one Avenger, it's safe to say that there's not a whole lot of competition for this, and it would be of incredibly high value. Did the crew never think to sell any of these wings to people? An escape like the one we saw at the ATM would have been far easier if they had the wingsuits. Yet there's clearly no investment whatsoever, to the point where they believe they have nothing after the Gargan deal is finished. It causes them to desperately try to steal from the Avengers, despite Vulture's constant refusal earlier in the film.
I finished designing that high-altitude vacuum seal.
I told you, no. The answer is no. Forget it.
Maybe it is time that I build the high-altitude seal.
You just shut up about that. Can you get that high-altitude seal thing up and running in time?
Seriously? Yes.
On top of this, Vulture often doesn't do a good job staying under the radar. Later we learn that this lazy guy was selected as the Shocker, the guy who runs the deal for potential buyers. However, Vulture remarks on how little he's able to trust him.
How many times have I told you not to fire him out in the open?
You said move the merchandise.
Under the radar.
That's how we survive.
Yeah, whatever, old man. Come on. I know you don't give a crap about anything, but I do.
This guy is characterized to be a consistent moron, someone who was dumb enough to fire weapons out in the open against Vulture's warnings, and Vulture had to constantly tell him not to do this. Yet Vulture entrusts him with this high level of responsibility compared to the other Shocker who seems to actually have common sense and sticks by Vulture's orders.
Letting off shots in public now, hurry up.
Smart villains who actually care about staying under the radar would send their least competent for less important jobs, while sending their best to deal with the more important jobs. You don't send Marco and O'Hearn to lead deals with Norman Osborn. That's stupid. If these deals are supposed to be under the radar, then why isn't it a standard precaution to go into these deals with masks on? You shouldn't want anyone to have a single idea of what your sellers look like. If anyone gets caught with these weapons by the police and are questioned on where they got their weapons from under the promise of shortened sentences, or they even slip up due to interrogation tactics, then this puts Vulture's crew members at risk. Not to mention that some of these potential buyers could be undercover or on a wire, or viewed by hidden cameras. The crew even acknowledges the risk of any setups and have weapons prepared for this.
Did you set us up?
Hey, man.
If possibilities like this are discussed, Vulture would for sure want to keep their faces hidden to prevent any of this tying to their personal lives. Even ignoring regular investigators, what happens if Daredevil or any other New York vigilantes are patrolling and they secretly spot this weapons deal? What if they're keeping tabs on certain criminals and this leads them towards the weapons deal? And these are vigilantes with reputations of taking down criminals, even to the status of Wilson Fisk. If Shocker was given a comic-accurate suit, it would have made more sense in the story, considering that when you engage in criminal activities, you most definitely want to hide your face. And on top of that, the gauntlet design in itself is really silly. Of all the weapons you can create with this exotic material, whoever takes up the role of Shocker is left with a close-range boxing glove that shocks you on impact. A guy with a pistol could overpower the Shocker so easily. Either improve upon that thing or sell it, or at least repurpose the materials, instead of what we have in the film where they decide to arm the lead dealer with a boxing glove. They have so many weapons capable of shooting laser blasts at people, so I have no clue why they thought it was smart to not give Shocker any long-range capabilities. At the end of the film, Shocker was waiting outside of Peter's school. If you wanted to get the drop on him, a laser cutter, a laser blast, or the incineration gun would have been better than this close-range shot gauntlet. The plot issues by this point have been largely related to the Vulture, but there's a fair share of problems on Peter's side too.
The guy with the wings is obviously the source of the weapons. I gotta take him down.
I don't know how Peter could have known this. For all he knows, the Vulture could have been the backup and not the headmaster behind the weapons deal. What is it about the Vulture attacking him that makes him obviously the source of the weapons? By this logic, the Winter Soldier must obviously be the source of Hydra's resources simply because Captain America saw him physically intervene before. Like, there's no logic behind that. One of the major problematic plot points is Peter removing the training wheels protocol. Apparently it's possible for Ned Leeds to hack into Peter's suit and bypass all of its protocols, but this is Tony Stark we're talking about. This man has been able to hack into the Pentagon as well as S.H.I.E.L.D. Tony Tony is at the top of his game when it comes to hacking and cybersecurity, and he would implement heavily strict measures to prevent his suit from being hacked. But somehow, Ned can just bypass all his security features without even immediately alerting Tony about it? Did Ned just bypass any passwords Tony would have set, or basic alert systems that would warn Tony of potential breaches? Furthermore, there are a lot of questions that arise once we learn of what the suit is truly capable of. Spider-Man's suit that we saw in Civil War has a parachute that releases in the event of a fall, but Iron Man never provided Rhodey's new suit with a precaution like this. On top of this, the way the parachute activates is bizarre because it doesn't even give Peter a choice in the situation. It releases automatically without giving Peter the chance to give it an order, because releasing a parachute at the wrong time can render it useless. And Peter's judgment would be ideal for when to release it. Now, I'd understand if Peter's altitude was really low, but it wasn't, and we know the suit is capable of calculating its own altitude.
You have also not reinstalled your parachute, so a fall from this height would most likely be lethal.
We also learned that the suit has over 500 web shooter combinations. Tony was able to set that much up during the events of Civil War. You'd imagine how many applications this would have had in the airport scene. One example would be if Peter activated taser webs. It's a quick and easy verbal command that Peter could have been told of and allowed to use to detain people. I'm not saying he should hand over all the features to Peter, but just this one feature that's easy to activate and capable of tasing enemies. This could knock out Hawkeye, Wanda, Sam, and we know that Cap and Bucky are capable of being weakened by tasers. On top of how useful this would have been in Civil War, the training wheels protocol in itself doesn't make sense based on what the name implies. If Peter is meant to be trained by the suit to unlock more of its features, then why is Peter only capable of using generic web strands? Imagine if one of the early features he unlocked was taser webs. That'd be super useful to take down street threats. If there's a robbery taking place where people are armed, they can be taken out immediately by taser webs. Web grenades would also be a great way of getting the drop on criminals, but there seems to be no process of even gradually teaching Peter these additional web shooter combinations, which would be useful in making Peter's job easier and therefore more efficient in saving lives. Within 2 months, Peter could learn plenty from learning these web shooter combinations. He learns a ton in one night, but I guess he had no knowledge of how this parachute works even though that was evidently unlocked beforehand, so his other features are locked until he learns them, but not the parachute somehow. Later we get to the Washington Monument sequence, and there's a lot that comes across as contrived in order to have this sequence take place. Ned is concerned about Peter's disappearance, so you'd expect Ned to call Peter back the moment he gets the chance. Peter calls Ned during the competition, and Ned just doesn't pick up the call the moment he finishes. He would urgently check his phone out of concern for his friend who hasn't gotten back to him yet, and would call him back immediately. But for some reason, Ned walks a long distance from the decathlon to the Washington Monument before reaching out to his friend who is likely in great danger right now. And when he does call him, he chooses to do it right at the security terminal, right before he has to put the phone down anyway, and in this public area where Peter may have Spider-Man related things to talk about with him. It doesn't make sense for Ned's character, and it seems like it was done so Peter can be cut off and not deliver this piece of information. And Ned doesn't even listen to the voicemail that has said information after he's in the elevator, when it could be super important. He didn't get to hear Peter explain himself on the phone, Liz didn't let him finish what he was saying, so Ned would either call back or listen to the voicemail himself, since he's in a crowded elevator right now. He does neither for some reason, despite Peter urgently stressing the importance of what he's about to say, and then this bomb goes off and burns through his backpack without hitting any of the students. I don't really mind the fact that the students got lucky there, but when this bombing does get investigated, Ned's backpack being burned through will be an obvious point of origin from an investigator's point of view. Intentionally or not, the conclusion would be that Ned had a bomb in his backpack and is therefore responsible. This is never followed up on by the story, and I'm not sure why. And when the bomb goes off, instead of entering the very obvious point of entry at the front door, Peter decides to go all the way up to the Washington Monument when he doesn't even know how to enter from the top.
How do we get in there?
Not only should Peter have thought to use the actual entrance everyone else went through, but how does Karen not see this as a viable option either? Karen provides important hints or information to Peter on the spot. It's supposed to be a highly intelligent AI. Karen just didn't think to tell Peter to enter through the front door, when even Karen has no idea how to get in there?
Locating optimal entry point.
The Washington Monument plot point feels largely contrived overall, and I think the ferry scene only builds upon this issue. On many sides of the aisle, a lot of this doesn't make sense. For starters, I don't know why the Vulture would ever agree to a deal that's meant to be under the radar on a public ferry where anyone could witness the deal taking place. The Staten Island ferry is filled with cameras, we even see it in the film right here. And not only would there be security on the Staten Island ferry, but there would also be many civilians that could just walk wherever they wanted, which includes in the direction of their deal. On top of this, we see that they're hiding their weapons within a white pickup truck, and nobody checked the car at the ferry. Apparently you can just throw anything in your vehicles and bring them on a public transportation vessel vessel where you're surrounded in water? Cars aren't even allowed on the Staten Island ferry because of 9/11, and even if they were allowed, they'd have to go through a security checkpoint beforehand due to glaring security concerns. And much worse than 9/11 has taken place in the MCU in regards to national security, such as Hydra's infiltration of S.H.I.E.L.D., Kingpin's infiltration of the legal system, or any of Zemo's plans in Civil War. In a world like the MCU, I find it difficult to accept that security for these things would be lax in comparison. And it also makes the Vulture look super unintelligent for not thinking of this. Did he not think to himself, huh, if security was to check my car at the ferry and find all these illegal alien tech weapons, this would be really destructive to my goals. And Vulture already acknowledged that there wasn't a whole lot of noise regarding the alien tech weapons before Spider-Man showed up. If a superhero is starting to look into what's being done, with seemingly inexplicable leads on them, this is a problem. It can lead to interest from law enforcement agencies or the Avengers, and he's already concerned about the fact that the first Shocker fired weapons out in the open, which got Spider-Man's attention, and later led to him following the Vulture's next heist. For all Vulture knows, Spider-Man could have warned Damage Control about what's happening, and they're on the law enforcement's radar, and because of Damage Control's connection to Stark, Iron Man could be looking into this. A public transportation vessel is one of the worst places to ever do an illegal deal under these circumstances. Why risk any kind of exposure at all? And on top of this, we know that the Vulture brought his suit and weaponry into one of these vans in the event he needed it. So the Vulture's plan was to run into this van as Adrian Toomes, where witnesses could possibly see, and then come out of that van soon afterwards as the Vulture. It'll be a great mystery as to who that guy could be. This is another reason not to have this deal on a public transportation vessel. They at least had a more secluded location in comparison earlier in the film, where there wouldn't be any security, and it's far less likely for witnesses to be around. And what's made even worse is that by the end, Spider-Man has a lot of evidence against the Vulture and his crew, thanks to the fact that his suit records everything he sees.
I record everything you see.
Everything?
Everything.
Shocker's face is on camera, twice. Vulture's face is seen early on while he's talking to Shocker, which proves their association.
He's up front, main deck. I hate this guy. Just keep me posted.
He has Shocker admitting to the location of the weapons on the ferry alongside the weapons themselves.
White pickup truck.
He has Vulture knocking out this one guy right by the van he's about to enter and suit up as the Vulture in. He has the faces of Shocker and Vulture, which Tony could turn into the FBI and have them arrested, or at least have their faces put out in the media to let the public know to report these wanted individuals if they're seen. And if they don't do either of those options, they could easily put these people on a watch list. The FBI and Tony Stark would definitely have the means to keep tabs on these people, so when the Vulture suits up and starts flying over to Avengers Tower, they would see that. They would intervene very early on. Not to mention the fact that the ferry itself has security cameras. Despite having such great evidence against them, Tony does nothing with this. Tony doesn't even question Peter on evidence he could have during his conversation, or even intel or leads that would help Iron Man track these people down. What's even made worse is that after the events of the ferry, the FBI also doesn't try to question Spider-Man on anything he's seen, or what information and evidence he could have. And to get into a wider problem with the story, Spider-Man's relation to law enforcement is very poorly explained, considering the events of Civil War. The Sokovia Accords need to be signed if you want to be a superhero, otherwise, you retire. Spider-Man is an illegal vigilante, who not only hasn't signed the Accords, but has definitely broken it many times.
The Sokovia Accords. They'll operate under the supervision of a United Nations panel only when and if that panel deems it necessary.
And if we come to a decision you don't like?
Then you retire.
If someone wants to say that Spider-Man isn't technically an Avenger, all I'll counter with is the fact that Black Panther wasn't an Avenger either, and he was going to be arrested for his involvement in Civil War. Same goes for Ant-Man. And by that logic, Wanda can just say that she's leaving the Avengers, and she's cutting all associations to it. That doesn't mean the government will just let her be a superhero without supervision.
Are you saying you'll arrest me?
No, someone will. If you interfere, that's how it works now.
If superheroes must operate under the supervision of the UN panel, and only when they deem it necessary, then Spider-Man has broken this many times on top of being an illegal vigilante. He's known for fighting crime in Queens. He fought the robbers with the alien tech, which resulted in the deli getting blown up. And while it's not entirely Spider-Man's fault or intentions, the Avengers get blamed for things that weren't entirely their fault or intentions anyways, so it's not like the Accords heavily consider whether Spider-Man intended for the result or not. But to build upon that, Spider-Man Spider-Man has broken through the damage control crate at their facility, which I assume would have cameras, why wouldn't they? This means Spider-Man somehow got into the truck with all of this alien tech that he shouldn't have access to and destroyed some of their property in the process. Weirdly convenient timing that since around that time, a purple explosion goes off in the elevator that Spider-Man tries to save. Spider-Man has interfered when the police didn't want him to, and he went in to save the elevator anyway.
DC Metro Police, identify yourself. Turn to the ground immediately. Return to the ground or we will open fire.
This is against the police's orders when they're supposed to be enforcing the law, which includes the Accords. But to top it all off, Spider-Man directly interfered with an active sting operation, and not only did this cause the Vulture to escape, but it also caused a ferry to split in half. As a result of everything mentioned earlier, Spider-Man should be on the law enforcement's radar. He absolutely has broken the Accords many times, and from the government's perspective, could have gotten many people killed with these events. Spider-Man should be facing legal consequences, but he doesn't despite the fact he would be perceived as a threat to public safety. They don't even try to take Spider-Man in for questioning. Spider-Man is just let off without any attempts to arrest him. It's not like Tony could protect him easily either. Team Iron Man failed to capture Cap and Bucky at the airport, which Ross was mad about and reduced his ability to believe Tony.
You seriously think I'm gonna listen to you after that fiasco in Leipzig?
He even says Tony is lucky that he's not in one of these cells because it was Tony's call to do things his way that prevented the capture of Captain America from the government's point of view, which also led to the rest of Team Cap being freed.
GSG-9's got the borders covered. Recon's flying 24/7. They'll get a hit. We'll handle
it. You don't get it, Stark. It's not yours to handle. Clear, you can't be objective. I'm putting special ops on this.
What happens when the shooting starts? What, do you kill Steve Rogers?
If we're provoked, Barnes would have been eliminated in Romania if it wasn't for Rogers. There are dead people who would be alive now. Feel free to check my math.
You're not going to solve this with boys and bullets, Ross. You got to let us bring them in.
And how would that end any differently than last time?
72 hours. Guaranteed.
You seriously think I'm going to listen to you after that fiasco in Leipzig?
On top of this, Tony similarly didn't have the power over the government to prevent Black Widow from being on the run.
T'Challa told Ross what you did, so they're coming for you.
Tony essentially let Nat escape because she's still his friend, and he blatantly implies that the government will be after her outside of his own control. So no, Iron Man doesn't have the power to tell the government to let Spider-Man off the hook. Tony has no leverage to work with. At most, maybe Tony could convince the government by telling him that he supplied Spider-Man with the suit in the first place, took it away, and made it very clear to him that he needs to quit being Spider-Man. But that doesn't even work as a defense, because if that was true, then Tony would have said this to Peter. He would have warned him that there would be a manhunt against him if he continues to be Spider-Man, and that this situation put Tony on thin ice with the government since it was his suit to begin with. And Tony essentially aided Spider-Man's illegal vigilantism that goes against the Accords. So because of the fact this never comes up as a concern, I can only assume that the government just doesn't care about the fact that Spider-Man has spat in the face of the Accords many times to the point he almost destroyed many lives on the ferry. There should be a manhunt against Spider-Man for what he's been doing. Compare this to the Amazing Spider-Man. That actively accounts for the fact that the law enforcement would want to keep tabs on Spider-Man. And if there isn't a manhunt now, then there should at least be a warning given by Tony. And since Peter decides to continue being Spider-Man anyway by stealing someone's car and driving super recklessly with it to the point of destroying it, then this would for sure put Spider-Man on the wanted list. Even at the end of the movie where Spider-Man is involved in a plane crash, there's no mention of the fact that the government would still be pissed at Spider-Man and wouldn't allow him to just operate as a vigilante once more. There's no moment where Tony tells Peter that they're coming for him. If anything, it would actually add on to Peter's sacrifice at the end of the movie if stopping the Vulture also meant more trouble with law enforcement. But instead, the Accords are left unaccounted for by the movie. As we reach the final act, the plot still has major issues. From the jump, Tony knows that the Vulture has been stealing and using alien tech, which can be weapons of mass destruction. Tony doesn't know how big this organization is. For all he knows, there could be 2 or 3 more people in flight suits. In spite of what happened at the ferry, he's just okay with his plane having no armed guards present during the transfer. Anyone can just bust into this plane and start stealing stuff from him and fly right out. Tony literally lost an arc reactor in his first movie because he wasn't secure enough, and instead of learning from that, he decided to have a plane that includes a bulk of arc reactors and nobody's guarding it. This nerf in Tony's intelligence allows this entire final act to happen, and the Vulture didn't even bring a gun on him in the event that there are armed guards for him to fight. We know this because if he did, he would have used it to fight Spider-Man on the plane. Spider-Man does have a bit of plot armor during this final battle as well. Vulture knows of Spider-Man's abilities pretty well by this point, which would include his super durability, so when he has Peter on the ground, instead of using the blades on his wings to stab him, he goes in for a few punches as if Spider-Man is going to be taken down by that, and even at the end, he basically has Spider-Man dead to rights and could stab him easily. He has no reason to let him live when Spider-Man has connections to the Avengers and knows his identity and is capable of getting up at some point and fighting back since he is superhuman. And Vulture does have some plot armor at the end when he falls down from a pretty high height and then blows up on impact. After that, the Vulture should be dead. He took an explosion head on when his helmet was off and his suit was already breaking apart. Last I checked, these kinds of blows killed people in the MCU. Outside of that, I have nothing else to say about the issues in the plot. I think the plot does a lot of damage to the story, but there are other things I'd like to talk about as well. Tony Stark is completely assassinated as a character in this movie. Very little of what he does throughout the plot is in character. Earlier, I've touched upon how he basically screwed over Adrian and his crew. Adrian blatantly states that he bought trucks for this joint because he had a city contract to salvage this material. All of the money he spent for the resources to do this job is meaningless because Damage Control took over the operation and Adrian's crew was given no money to compensate for how much he would have lost, when these people are at risk of losing their homes. This is vehemently out of character for Tony Stark to allow for in his joint venture with Damage Control. Having people believe they've been screwed over is what created villains like Ivan Vanko. Civil War demonstrated a much clearer understanding of his character by showing him using his money to fund student projects and support their futures. Age of Ultron does this as well by establishing the Stark Relief Foundation, showing that he uses his money to help pay for those who have suffered from destructive battles.
Stark Relief Foundation?
Already on the scene.
This all stems from Tony's belief in personal accountability. That's why he shuts down weapons manufacturing the moment he realizes the amount of lives that are being destroyed. He decides it's his mission to stop those who have gotten their hands on his weapons, to make up for the danger he has indirectly put these people in. So to screw over an entire salvaging crew by allowing them to waste money and resources on a job that they were cut from, with no attempt to even compensate them to prevent significant financial loss, especially when the economy in New York would take a hit from the Battle of New York, all of this makes Tony extremely out of character. This is something that Norman Osborn would do, not the man who would send himself on a one-way trip to save an entire city. And although this largely falls on Tony Stark, we can't forget that Pepper Potts was appointed as the CEO.
Well, Miss Potts has a company to run.
So the damage extends to Pepper's character, since as the CEO of Stark Industries, she'd have to be involved in this joint venture. And as we move forward, the rest of the film doesn't do Tony's character any better. Upon learning of the alien tech weapons, he tells Spider-Man not to worry about it under the basis that people are handling it.
Steady, Crockett. There are people who handle this sort of thing.
The Avengers?
No. Just a little below their pay grade.
That's the reason Iron Man gives for why he won't prevent the spread of weapons of mass destruction that threaten public safety, despite his character being driven by his responsibility to protect people when his own resources fall into the wrong hands.
I saw young Americans killed by the very weapons I created to defend them and protect them. And I saw that I had become part of a system that is comfortable with zero accountability.
Alongside the cancellation of weapons manufacturing, Tony is also pushed to interfere when it's brought to his attention that terrorists have been using his weapons to attack civilians.
In case you didn't
Is
hear.
this what you call accountability? It's a town called Gulmira.
When were these taken?
Yesterday.
I didn't approve any shipment.
Well, your company did.
Well, I'm not my company. Have you seen these pictures? What's going on? If we're double dealing under the table, are we?
Simple farmers and herders from peaceful villages have been driven from their homes. These men are heavily armed, a mission that could prove fatal to anyone who stands in their way. Around me, a woman begging for news on her husband who was kidnapped by insurgents.
No. Just a little below their pay grade.
This isn't below his pay grade. This isn't something he left the US military to take care of.
He's all yours.
Are we cleared to go in there?
No, sir. They were using human shields. We never got the green light.
Again, he sees this as his responsibility above all else.
And what do you plan to do with this information if I bring it back here?
Same drill. They've been dealing under the table, and I'm going to stop them. I'm going to find my weapons and destroy them.
I cannot help you if you're going to start all of this again.
There is nothing except this. There's no art opening. There is no benefit. There is nothing to sign. There is the next mission. And nothing else. I shouldn't be alive. Unless it was for a reason. I just finally know what I have to do. And I know in my heart that it's right. No. Just a little below their pay grade.
The alien tech weapons could only be obtained from scraps from the Avengers battles that haven't been collected by Damage Control or by stealing from Damage Control itself. Either way, they should not be out there from Tony's perspective, and therefore his responsibility to get it off the streets. This is absolutely not below his pay grade. It was his job to make sure that the alien tech didn't fall into the wrong hands in the first place. The Avengers went to a Hydra base because they had alien weapons, one of which was in the hands of Loki and was their primary interest. They didn't leave this to the US military because this isn't below their pay grade. It's disrespectful to Tony's character as well as the Avengers. It's out of character for Tony to have this attitude, and there's no way he should expect Peter to be comfortable with such a nothing plan to ensure people's safety. It's not unreasonable for Peter to think that superheroes would be needed for the task, because they are. They're dealing with technology that literally contended with them. They literally have a laser cutter that could slice an entire crowd if they wanted to. If Tony wanted Peter to be better than him, then he should be making efforts to advance him as a hero instead of telling him to ignore threats to public safety as if that's standard for the Avengers, as if that's below their pay grade. It goes against Tony's belief in taking responsibility and truly being a hero with or without the suit. I understand that he doesn't want to involve Spider-Man out of concerns for Peter's safety, but at the same time, he shouldn't be doing nothing about it and communicating how little it matters to him. That's not what Iron Man would consider responsible, nor does this set a good example for Spider-Man despite wanting him to be better. Furthermore, Tony has no idea how big or powerful Vulture's organization is by this point, yet he makes no attempt on his end to stop what they're doing. He leaves it to the FBI because it's below his pay grade. For all he knows, there could be more than one Vulture suit within their organization. If there are even two of them, with laser-cutting weapons or alien explosives, the FBI would have little chances in a confrontation, not to mention the various weapons their backup gunmen could have on the ground, or if there are more people in flight suits. And these suits could be bulletproof, because they're literally using the alien material from 2012. So even if the FBI were to shoot at them, that might not even work. And there could be nearby civilians in the location where they get confronted. And after the events of the ferry take place, where a boat full of people almost died, you'd think that would have incentivized Tony to take on the Vulture himself. Tony has a suit full of recordings of the event, including Vulture's face, yet he made zero attempts to put the word out about who this guy is or even investigate and track him down.
You busy? Manifest on the iron? You're gonna hack into the mainframe, you're gonna retrieve all the recent shipping manifests. It's probably under executive files. If not, they put it on a ghost drive, in which case you need to look for the lowest numeric heading.
And what do you plan to do with this information if I bring it back here?
Same drill. They've been dealing under the table and I'm gonna stop them.
Even Iron Man 3 got this right.
I've compiled a Mandarin database for you, drawn from SHIELD, FBI, and CIA intercepts. Initiating virtual crime scene reconstruction. Accessing satellites and plotting the last 12 months of thermogenic occurrences now.
What am I looking at, Friday? So what happened to the real Broussard?
He was found dead in a Berlin hotel. Also found a wig and facial prosthesis approximating the appearance of one James Buchanan Barnes.
Get this to Ross. Got files? Let's reboot the satellites. Start facial scanning for this Zemo guy.
And he didn't even attend his plane's transfer of resources that included some of the most valuable yet dangerous technology, which allowed the Vulture to steal it to begin with. One of these includes arc reactors. You'd think after one of those was stolen from him to finalize an Iron Man suit for a villain, he'd be much more protective of this kind of technology. And this is after Vulture has already stolen from Damage Control, and he would have seen in the recordings in the suit that he can use a matter phase shifter to enter places undetected. He already should have ensured that these truck transfers were well secured, which is a problem in itself, but it's only amplified by the fact that he'd have reason to investigate Peter's recordings for the sake of grabbing evidence and chasing leads, which would force him to learn of the fact that Vulture steals from Damage Control in ways he can easily avoid detection. After learning this, he's still neglected to add motion sensors, armed guards, or his own remote-controlled suit as security measures. Or even worse, he didn't know about this because he neglected to even try investigating or looking for clues, which at that point is self-evidently out of character. His negligence is responsible for how far the Vulture gets in this film, yet he places the full blame onto Peter for the events on the ferry and never takes it into account how the Vulture never would have made it this far if he simply secured the alien tech with more care, or didn't consider this issue beneath him to begin with. He never considers why Peter rightfully believed that this problem calls for superheroes, considering how dangerous these weapons are. There's no awareness from from the film that Tony has undermined his own belief in personal responsibility. Captain America Civil War does this much better by framing Tony in a more questionable light, as opposed to being the wise mentor who knows better. He gets confronted on his willingness to surrender his freedom to the government. He gets confronted on the fact that he won't let Wanda leave the compound. He gets confronted on his ego and how it affects his judgment. Tony is treated as a desperate man who doesn't want to stop, under the belief that what he's doing is most beneficial for the safety of the world. The mistakes he makes are out of a desperate need to maintain the status of the Avengers, worried that if he doesn't do enough, he'll be the cause of everything falling apart, and that includes accepting basic accountability.
And I saw that I had become part of a system that is comfortable with zero accountability.
And then Ultron. My fault. Clearly, I made a mistake. Sam, I was wrong.
In this movie, the mistakes Tony makes are out of negligence and laziness, because he didn't even try. It was his job to secure the exotic material to begin with, and it never crosses his mind that the Vulture's network even existing is a product of his own failure. Tony Stark is completely destroyed in this movie. As for Peter Parker's character, I do have quite a bit of issues, ranging from smaller moments of minimal consequence to things that I think are significantly out of character. For starters, I do find it jarring how easily Peter glosses over the events of Civil War. He grew up admiring the Avengers and what they do, so you'd think that the events of Civil War would be somewhat stressful to him. Half of the Avengers have been split up and sent to prison as a result of a major fallout that Spider-Man had to witness and be involved in.
They're not stopping.
Neither are we.
And Rhodey almost died in the airport fight. I think he'd be really concerned about his survival. And in spite of this, he's just like,
The most amazing thing that's ever happened. So Mr. Stark was like, hey, Underoos! And I just sort of flipped in, and I stole Cap's shield, and I was like, hey, what's up, everybody?
He acts like this is the best day of his life, and that's just bizarre to me. There's no acknowledgement of how lots of the people Spider-Man looked up to have had their lives damaged or changed for the worst moving forward. And I understand that Spider-Man's really excited to be an Avenger, and how the glory of that can impede his judgment, but I still think the story stretches this too far, considering that Peter still has basic empathy for people, even his villains. And from what we know about Peter from Civil War, I find it questionable how Peter actually thinks about the implications of joining the Avengers. Peter isn't Spider-Man for any kind of reward. Peter is Spider-Man because he has the power to help people, and if he doesn't use it, bad things will happen because of him.
And yeah, I would love to play football, but I couldn't then, so I shouldn't now.
Sure, because you're different.
But I can't tell anybody that, so I'm not. When you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
So if he has any investment in the Avengers and what they do, he's going to care about the fact that they've split up and would want to know why, especially if he's being told that he needs to help get them arrested. Peter claims that Cap is wrong and thinks he's right, and I presume it was because he was informed of Bucky bombing the UN and that Cap is protecting him, so in the moment he views it as Cap looking the other way for his dangerous friend. But Peter believing that Cap is protecting the UN bomber only works in the short term, because he would eventually learn that Bucky was proven innocent, and so Cap was justified in protecting him as opposed to looking the other way and never helping him. And it makes sense of Cap telling Spider-Man that he doesn't understand what's going on. It would have been understood that despite what the law was telling them, Cap and Bucky were trying to detain the actual terrorist responsible for the UN bombing, who additionally threatened to release super soldiers to take down an empire. So at that point, he would realize that he was wrong to try to imprison Cap with Tony, even though Cap tried to explain himself when confronted, and therefore the government can be wrong about when they need to arrest superheroes, or when they demand superheroes not to intervene. And because Team Cap is still being hunted in spite of this, he would see that as an unfair circumstance to put them in. And he would also learn that this is because of the Sokovia Accords. In fact, he's learning about this in school.
The Sokovia Accords were put into place.
He'd have to know that the basis of the Sokovia Accords is that the government tells you when you can or can't use your powers to help people.
The Sokovia Accords. They'll operate under the supervision of a United Nations panel only when and if that panel deems it necessary.
And if we come to a decision you don't like?
Then you retire.
So, in other words,
all you have to remember is to look the other way on occasion. On any occasion I choose.
Peter Parker would need permission from the government to fight crime, and if it isn't granted, Peter Parker has to look the other way. And if he doesn't sign on to their terms, then he's not allowed to fight crime. Joining the Avengers means signing on to these terms. Knowing of the Accords would contextualize why Captain America's side was against them. Cap would have legally been obligated to look the other way and never protect Bucky, his best friend that he knew was innocent, possibly to die considering they had orders to shoot on sight after he was framed. Especially with this in mind, Peter would never accept a system where the people in power pick and choose when he helps people and lock you up when you don't agree and decide to help people anyway. We know this because Iron Man tells Spider-Man not to deal with the Vulture, and Peter opposes this the entire film because he knows it's his responsibility to protect people from the Vulture and what he is capable of. He goes against Tony's order for that reason.
These guys are selling weapons that are crazy dangerous. They can't just be out on the streets. Those weapons were out there, and I tried to tell you about it, but you didn't listen.
And it's not just Tony's orders, but also the law enforcement's orders. He gets told by the police and the FBI to stop intervening, but he does anyway. If half of the heroes that he looked up to, that were needed to save the world many times before, were thrown in prison and are on the run after they escape, Peter would want to know why. If anything, Peter would want to see if there was a fix to all this, because it'd be better for the safety of the world if the Avengers weren't split apart. Peter would have to know that Cap opposed what the Accords had to offer, and Tony's side fought for it. This is not a system that Peter would accept, and if he learned that Tony was fighting for it, he'd realize that he was fighting for the wrong side. Tony's side is the side of don't go after the Vulture, but apply to the Avengers. Tony was going to stop them from catching the actual terrorist that Cap tried to tell them about. Peter would see it as wrong for Tony to have Cap's team locked up, and even try to convince Tony of that because he would see this as a detriment to the well-being of the world, but this never comes up. Peter never feels bad about this or even reflects on this for a moment. Instead, Peter is eager to join the Avengers and become part of a group that is supposed to lock up fellow superheroes for resisting a cause that Peter would have every reason to think is unfair, and the film never recognizes this. With this context in mind, it makes no sense for Peter's arc to revolve around him wanting to be like Tony Stark and learning that he just needs to be himself.
I just wanted to be like you.
Peter Parker wants to be like the guy who tells him to look the other way from a criminal.
Look, forget the flying vulture guy, please.
Why?
Why? Because I said so.
Do you have any idea what happened the last time he looked the other way for a thief? This is how Peter Parker would actually react to what Tony and by extension the Accords has to offer.
Only when and if that panel deems it necessary.
I can't ever look the other way again.
It gets to a point where Peter considers leaving high school and Aunt May behind so he can live with the Avengers, completely ignoring what this means for him.
Ned, I'm probably never gonna come back here.
Want to be a high school dropout?
I am so far beyond high school right now.
This means that if he ever finds Captain America, he would have to fight him and arrest him, and thus remove any potential Cap has to help people with what he can do. And that also means that they can never accept half of the Avengers' help if a world-ending threat were to take place. And Peter would know that the government has taken issue with the Battle of New York, the Triskelion fight, the Sokovia fights, and the Lagos fight. All of this involves his fellow heroes doing their best to help people when the world needs them to, and the proposed solution is to reduce their interference to the extent shown in Civil War.
Are you saying you'll arrest me?
No, someone will.
If you interfere, that's how it works now.
This should not make sense to Peter, especially when Tony tries exactly that with the Vulture and Peter refuses. Peter fundamentally doesn't agree with inaction. If Peter from the very beginning of the film didn't understand this, he surely would at the end of the film, where he confronts Tony on none of this. He doesn't even talk to Tony about the Accords and what it means for the safety of the world. It's a dead subject to Peter, and that's the end for him. He even concedes to Tony's mindset of staying on the ground and helping the little people, as if Tony had some kind of point in the end and there was nothing left to challenge him on. People often criticize how prevalent Tony Stark is as a mentor figure to this version of Peter Parker, and while I don't think a lot of people have done the best job explaining it, I think there is a valid point to be made. I don't think it makes any sense for Peter's arc to revolve around wanting to be like Iron Man and prove himself worthy of being an Avenger, because their current methods are antithetical to his morals. He would never look up to someone who keeps telling him to make the same mistake that got his Uncle Ben killed, and arrest other superheroes that were literally needed to save the world for not supporting him. He has access to the information that would tell him this, and he has full reason to be invested in it. I don't think it makes any sense for Peter to not question or be concerned with why half the world's best defenders are locked up or on the run. Doing so would reveal to him how detached from his beliefs the Accords are. And this isn't to say that a movie has to be like the comics, but the comics did this so much better, because when Peter sees clear hints that the methods of the Avengers don't align with his principles, he realizes that the team isn't for him because he refuses to sacrifice his principles, that he believes can mean the difference between life and death. He wouldn't give that all up just to be an Avenger. And that's exactly what MCU Spider-Man has done. The entire basis of Peter's character arc is built on Spider-Man having inconsistent morals. It gets to a point where he thinks he's nothing without the suit because it represents his chances to prove himself to Tony, and now it's gone. But Spider-Man's worth never came from what suit he's wearing or who he impresses. This is something Peter knew from day one of his introduction.
And yeah, I would love to play football, but I couldn't then, so I shouldn't now.
Sure, because you're different.
But I can't tell anybody that, so I'm not.
Peter would love to have the respect and admiration for what he does, but if that gets gets in the way of what's right, then he wouldn't opt for gaining respect and admiration. Spider-Man's worth comes from preventing the bad things from happening to people, not if it impresses Tony Stark or gives him a spot on the Avengers, a team that's supposed to arrest other world-saving superheroes for opposing a cause that Peter wouldn't accept. Not only does Peter's character arc not work, but there are character decisions throughout that are just blatantly out of character. I want to start off by pointing out that Peter is very bad at keeping a secret identity, when we know that Peter wants his identity kept secret to protect his loved ones. He first jumps really high outside his high school for some reason, and while he does look around before doing so, there's a chance someone can walk out of the door while Peter is midair. After all, this is the end of the day where everyone is leaving. But this isn't too egregious. What I find largely egregious is how Peter continuously loses his backpacks, which could have ties to his secret identity.
I need a new backpack.
That's 5.
Now, in fairness, we don't have context for the 4 other times he lost his other backpacks. However, we do have the context of what happened the 5th time. So after Peter has already lost 4 by this point, he decided to web his backpack on ground level, where someone can just cut the webbing off and see what's inside, after having lost his backpack 4 times. He's not even in a hurry, so why not just drop his backpack off at home first, or put it in a building where only someone like Spider-Man could easily access? Not only should Peter know this is a bad hiding place that can risk his belongings being tied to his identity, but it also just wastes Aunt May's money while he's already struggling financially. So if Peter was this stupid for the 5th time he lost his backpack, who knows how stupid he was the other times? Maybe they were stolen while Peter was dealing with an emergency, but that would only add on to how obvious it should be to Peter that anybody can steal these at any time. There's also this moment at the party where Peter is staring directly into the big windows at Liz's home, and I'm just thinking to myself that if anybody happened to look up in this direction here, then they would see Peter's face. Why would Peter ever change here of all places? And he does this again when he's staring at Liz through the skylight at Maryland. An even more egregious example is when it's revealed that Peter regularly hides his web fluid and homemade suit under his school lockers. What was so bad about hiding it in his room or his backpack, or anywhere else that's not in an open hallway that anyone can walk into? Any student or staff member can walk outside of any of these classrooms at any time, or enter this hallway from either end, and they'd see Peter lifting up these lockers. What's even worse is that this hallway has security cameras. If someone is looking at the cameras while Peter is doing this, or a report is made of Peter doing this, and security checks the cameras at the time, Peter's identity is completely screwed. And later on, he unmasks himself on this ledge right here, the FBI literally trying to stop Spider-Man and are probably after him now that he disrupted their sting operation. That covers the problems with how bad Peter is at keeping his identity a secret, but now I'll talk about how he performs as a hero. I'll touch on this more in the nerfing section, but what I'm about to talk about gets into deeper character problems. I strongly take issue with the fact that Peter's plan to reach the Vulture was to steal Flash's car when Peter is very inexperienced in driving, which actively risks people's lives on the road. Any car crash taking place can kill or hurt civilians that are just having a chill night drive. Peter almost crashes into people during the scene and still carries on with this dangerous plan. Now I know people are going to bring up that Peter thinks this is quicker and that the area isn't good for web swinging, but this doesn't work for a few reasons. Firstly, Peter doesn't have to web swing all the time to get around. Cap, Bucky, and Black Panther can run faster than speeding cars, and Spider-Man is more enhanced than them. He can even keep up with Iron Man's flight during the airport fight, and was even ahead of Black Panther as he was sprinting for vengeance. Spider-Man can both swing and run to Vulture's location. I mean, look at how fast he moves in this video alone.
40 miles an hour? It's not easy.
Great! Guess I'm gonna have to take a shortcut. Almost got you. Thought you got away from me, didn't you? I got you. Right where I want you.
But even then, he doesn't have to do that. Ned is actively tracking Peter's phone. You don't need to engage in a dangerous car chase to catch a guy that you're already tracking. From Peter's perspective, the evidence in his suit that shows Vulture's face would have been looked at by Tony Stark and the FBI, which is why I assume he didn't feel the need to direct Tony's attention to it earlier. So once he literally has a tracker in his car, he just needs to give that location to the police and nearby units will be driving to Vulture while he's unaware of the fact he's being tracked. Or he can call Tony about it through Happy, who Peter would reasonably assume is on the case. He doesn't even have to specifically go to the Vulture. If he wants to directly reach Happy, he can go straight to Avengers Tower, which is where the plane that Vulture wants to steal from is anyway. And even then, he doesn't have to be the one driving. We've seen him ride other vehicles and switch to other vehicles based on where he needs to go. He can do this alongside running or swinging over, which doesn't risk car crashes or pileups on the road. And he even seems to celebrate the fact that it's Flash's car as if he's doing this out of spite too. thing. Sure, Flash has humiliated him or called him names and whatnot, but he never tried to physically harm Peter or eat into his financial situation. But Peter is taking joy in stealing his car, which could possibly get it destroyed, and therefore cause trouble with his family, who has nothing to do with Flash's petty behavior. It'd be one thing if the film challenged Peter for this, which the comics actually do pretty well, but it doesn't. It plays it off like a funny gag.
What would you call that?
It's awesome! It's awesome! Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Move! Move! What? That makes no sense! I thought he said he was going out of town!
Weird. Oh.
It's a miracle no one was killed.
So right off the bat, you can probably tell that I don't think highly of this portrayal of Peter Parker. I think the basis of his arc doesn't make any sense. He is uncharacteristically careless with the secret identity, despite knowing it's dangerous to his loved ones for his identity to be exposed. And he needlessly endangers people on the road, while taking joy in getting back at his bully by destroying something his dad gave him. Furthermore, Spider-Man is definitely nerfed in this movie compared to Civil War. By nerfed, I mean that Spider-Man is not as powerful as he should be in these fights, and definitely isn't as intelligent of a character either. The point of this section is to show that Spider-Man's power scaling is inconsistent and that Peter is uncharacteristically incompetent, which does damage to him as a character, but not as much as what I've explained earlier. I want to draw attention to the fact that Civil War's explanation for the moving lenses is that Peter's spider sense gives him way too much input, and the lenses help him focus. And we know how his spider sense works when Bucky tosses an object at Spider-Man, and he's able to dodge that easily before it's even close to him. I bring this up because it almost feels like this film has forgotten about spider sense to the point where people are even debating if it even existed. Let's first take a look at this bank fight. Spider-Man gets blasted at a wall with the anti-gravity gun. Okay, no big deal. All Spider-Man has to do is get up and web the gun out of his hand. He has the reaction time to avoid being shot at, so I assume this should be an easy task.
Well, what is that thing?
Instead, he just looks at him for a bit and asks what that gun is, and then allows himself to get slammed around over and over again. Now, let's compare this to the recovery time he needed in Civil War, where Spider-Man gets bashed in the face with vibranium by a super soldier and immediately recovers, looks back in preparation for what's next, and keeps his distance after he realizes he underestimated Cap. He goes for another attack, gets kicked into a piece of metal, and recovers immediately to lift this jet bridge. Yet in Homecoming, he just temporarily gives up after one hit. And I don't believe he'd be too tired to react, because he gets hit a few times afterwards and reacts immediately once he's stuck to the ground, and because he was less fatigued in a fight with Bucky and Falcon or his fight with Captain America. Now let's get into some bigger examples. Take his fight with the first Shocker. Spider-Man runs at Shocker and ends up getting hit in the process, but compare that to how Spider-Man handled himself against the Winter Soldier. Spider-Man goes in to kick Falcon away and then immediately blocks Bucky's punch, when this guy is a super soldier who would have better reaction time than Shocker does. Spider-Man's reaction time and spider sense would have made it easy for him to dodge Shocker's hit. Shocker's just a normal human with a boxing glove, but on top of this, Spider-Man would have just webbed Shocker from far away. If there are 3 suspects that Spider-Man doesn't want to escape, it'd be quicker to just web each of them instead of letting them run their separate ways while running at one of them. Even one of the YouTube videos shows how easily Spider-Man would think to do this. Just compare that to how Spider-Man deals with Cap here to how he deals with Shocker. Cap has every reason to be more of a challenge for Peter, yet Shocker apparently stands more of a chance, and Spider-Man does a really bad job at keeping up with his van. His reaction speed and reflexes are so bad that he can't maintain balance while the van is pulling him. Now bear in mind that Cap, Bucky, and Black Panther can run faster than speeding cars, and Spider-Man is even more enhanced than all of them and can keep up with them in combat, and has more enhanced senses. You'd imagine that Spider-Man would have the coordination to balance himself well enough so he can get decent leverage on the van, and by that point, he could just yank himself towards the van so he gets closer, or slow down the van by webbing it and using his stickum powers to stand in place.
I got him!
Rhodey was thrown far away by Giant Man, and Spider-Man was able to find his balance easily when trying to web Rhodey, or when he literally hitched a ride when Rhodey was flying towards Giant Man. This guy also lifted an entire jet bridge, instantly stopped a 40-mile-per-hour car, and can hold his splitting ferry together, but he can't slow down this van by webbing it and pulling it, or webbing himself towards the van, despite having 8 months of experience where he performs insane lifting feats in the heat of the moment, and having fought half of the Avengers. Peter then gets grabbed from the Vulture from behind, and then he does nothing to defend defend himself. He starts screaming and shaking his leg and isn't able to escape. Falcon, another guy with wings, grabbed onto Peter, and his immediate reaction was to defend himself by any means necessary and push Falcon off. Falcon gets him from behind again, and Peter manages to escape and shut down his wings temporarily. Now compare that to Homecoming, where Peter gets grabbed by the Vulture, but he doesn't try to web him to keep him distracted, not even at his wings, which have its propellers exposed, even though he immediately thought to go for Falcon's wings the moment he had the chance. He shakes his leg for a little bit, but then lets go and continues to flail his arms around and do nothing. The next example would be during the scene where Peter tries to stop the Vulture's damage control heist. So Peter knows he has the drop on Vulture. Vulture doesn't know that Spider-Man is on the truck. So Peter decides to crawl backwards and wait for the Vulture to come out, instead of just swinging over to his wings, which are right there unattended, and then smashing them to pieces or disabling their engines and turbines so he can't use them. This is something he thought to do by instinct when he had the chance to do with Falcon. And even after the Vulture jumps upwards, Spider-Man just takes his bag and stops for a one-liner and just watches him jump back to his wings, literally just standing there, instead of just webbing the Vulture to begin with, or just webbing him after taking his bag. For what? Just so we can joke around? Next time you might as well just shake his hand and ask him to dinner. And again, compare this to Civil War, where he knew to web both of Falcon's hands the moment he gets close to him, and he knows to do the same to Bucky when he falls down with Falcon. Spider-Man has the reaction time to block hits from super soldiers, but not an old man from standing up and walking over to his wings. Remember when Spider-Man was smart?
Finally, it's mine. But you won't get the chance to use it. Not as long as I'm conscious.
You can say that this Peter is just a kid and inexperienced all you want, but Civil War shows us that Peter isn't this stupid. He has too much experience and intellect to mess up like this. And then the scene ends with Peter being knocked out by jumping into the ceiling, long enough so that he makes it all the way to the damage control vault. Spider-Man was hit by Giant Man and fell from this high height, but wasn't even knocked out for 15 seconds. But you're telling me that Spider-Man jumping into a ceiling knocks him out like this? The first half of this fairy fight is fine in terms of how Spider-Man performs. He only really starts to take a noticeable decline when he's up against the Vulture. There are times where Spider-Man could easily take him down much earlier, but decides not to. When he first webs the Vulture, he just needs to activate his taser webs to knock out Vulture, but he doesn't do that. He also doesn't do that the second time he webs onto him and has a chance. He thinks of it the third time, but this time the web happened to latch onto the weapon, which caused it to go unstable. None of that would have happened if Peter did it earlier. To Peter's credit, he is smart when he thinks to target all the structural weaknesses on the boat as it starts to split apart. He does that, but then he sees that he was 98% successful, but for some reason he just doesn't immediately web the final weak point right as it's pointed out to him. What is he waiting for? He just needs to shoot a web or swing a little closer than shoot a web. And considering that this thing could split apart with all these people in here, every second counts. Instead, he just stands there for a few seconds and does nothing, and then acts surprised when this has consequences. Even the Amazing Spider-Man 2 got this right. He didn't just stand there when he thought he got most of the job done.
Hey, wait, come back here. Gotcha.
And then instead of reinforcing the webs at the exact same weak points, he just stands there and watches. For a really long time, he's watching people fall over and come closer and closer to dying, and he does nothing despite the fact he just came up with a solution. And all he had to do was reinforce the webbing at the exact same locations. He doesn't even think to do that after he stares at the boat falling apart. He just webs one area of the boat and just stays there? What are you doing? This scientific genius knew that he had to distribute his webs throughout the boat instead of at one area, because obviously it's going to fall apart if there are gaps in webbing that aren't reinforced. Yet he leaves those gaps behind and just does this T-pose right here. And the final bit of nerfing is present in this fight with Shocker. So Spider-Man runs out of the school exit. Shocker isn't even right outside the door ready to attack him, and yet Spider-Man has no warning from his spider sense of Shocker's attack. And then in trying to run for his web shooters, Shocker slides a bus in his direction, and Spider-Man doesn't simply dodge it like he did when he dodged an object that Bucky threw. He couldn't have just ducked or jumped out of the way. I don't even believe Spider-Man couldn't stop or slow this bus by force, because he stopped a 40-mile-per-hour car in an instant with little effort, and then he takes absurdly long to recover from being hit by a bus. Spider-Man has been hit in the face by Cap's shield, kicked into metal by Cap, and instinctively lifted one of the heaviest things he's ever lifted as soon as he got up. So just because he gets hit by the bus one time, he's so dazed that he gets hit again into another bus? And let's just note how far back Shocker is from the bus that Peter was thrown into. Shocker is several yards away from the back of the bus when he hits Peter, and then Shocker is next seen near the front of the bus bus while Spider-Man is in there. So you're telling me Spider-Man was just laying down there, staring at the gum under the seats until Shocker arrived at the front of the bus to deliver another attack? He couldn't just leave immediately. And to top it all off, he needs Ned to save him by shooting a web shooter at Shocker. Peter was just going to sit there and take another punch from Shocker instead of doing literally anything to escape. He suddenly remembers that he's Spider-Man and can defend himself once Ned gets a shot on Shocker. Peter doesn't need Ned to do that. This is a normal guy. He literally could have just tripped Shocker as soon as he was walking to him. Spider-Man is a badass, not a buffoon.
Don't move! So are you trying to tell me this thing's bad for my cholesterol?
Hey, Big Bird! This doesn't belong to you!
Oh god.
This guy's a fraud.
It's Spider-Man!
Now that's spider strength. Sorry, Doc. I'm doing this for Billy as much as for you. Now that's spider strength.
Spider-Man?
Now that's spider strength. How about a taste of spider punch? Now that's spider strength.
Well, what is that thing? I'm starting to think you're not the Avengers!
Now that's spider strength.
Oh, my butt!
Now that's spider strength.
You have the right to remain silent! What the hell?
Now that's spider strength.
Can't do it on command. Wow, Miles! You're doing it on command!
Hey.
Activate taser whip!
A couple minutes ago wouldn't have been so bad either.
Great job, Peter. You're 98% successful.
98?
Oh, come on.
Hey, wait, come back here!
Gotcha!
Yeah, Spider-Man!
This guy's a fraud.
Tell everyone to hang on!
Now that's spider strength. Now that's spider strength.
Damn.
Now that's spider strength.
Why did he send you here?
Guess you'll never know.
I'm in mourning for my buried wreck. Spider-Man, the real one.
So that was quite a bit of problems to go over. If you're looking for a number rating, as a story I would give Homecoming a 3 out of 10. At least Michael Keaton's Vulture has some solid material in the movie. He's easily the best of the MCU Spider-Man villains, but otherwise the writing is heavily flawed and I can't say this is a good Spider-Man story. That's all I have for now. Let me know what you want me to review next in the comments. See you later.